So welcome. Appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Definitely have I think a good turnout. Sorry to anyone in the back that is not able to find a seat. There are a couple more in front here though. But again, welcome. It's good to see all of you. There's definitely some familiar faces out there, as well as some people that I haven't met, so some new faces as well, so it's really great to see. Right off the bat, before we get started into the program, what I want to do is just make a few things clear before we get started. First, what we'll be discussing tonight are proposed amendments from the Town Council. So these are proposed amendments. At this point, nothing has been passed, nothing's been decided on, nothing's gone through. They are simply proposed at this point. They'll come back to the Town Council in May for a decision, or for continued discussion at least. That first public hearing is scheduled for May 5th. Number two, everything we present tonight is going to be fact-based. So we're not here to add to any rumors or gossip or to blame or villainize anybody. We're here to help inform the public and to answer your questions. The goal for tonight is to increase public engagement. So in the end, you may agree with the Town Council. You may, with what the Town Council's proposed, you may disagree. That's for you to decide. We will be video recording the presentation and posting it to social media, including any questions from the public during the second half of the evening. We respect your right to privacy, so if anyone from the audience does end up speaking or asking a question, and you'd like that portion removed from the meeting, let us know after the meeting. We'll edit that out so you're not on video. Speaking of questions, this is a community meeting, not just a presentation, so a large part of the program during the second half will be reserved for questions and statements from the public. We hope that you have at least an hour as needed for that, and we're scheduled to go from 6 to 8 p.m. tonight. So with all of that said, I'd love to introduce the panel for this evening. First, we have Michael DeLuca. Mike was the Community Development Director here in Narragansett from 2005 to 2024. Before that, he served on the Narragansett Planning Board from 1993 until 2005, many of those years serving as the chair. Mike was instrumental in the existing town ordinances, in many of the existing town ordinances we'll be discussing tonight. Terry Fleming, Planning Board member from 1993 to 2023, so 30 years. Also served as the chair from 2005 to 2023. Next we have Deborah Kopech. Deb was a town council member from 2020 until 2024, so 2 terms. Deb served on the town council while a few of the major ordinances we'll be discussing tonight were developed. I did have the honor to serve with Deb from 2020 until 2022. And then I'm Jesse Pugh, and I did serve with the town council from 2018 to 2022. So I did 2 terms of the town council here in Narragansett. All right. What we're going to do is hand the microphone and the slides over to Mike, who's going to get us started off for tonight. Thanks, Mike. Oh, sorry, I do have one additional slide. Sorry, Mike. The video is running, yeah. So let's start with the purpose of this meeting. So first off, it's to inform the public of the 14 ordinance changes introduced as a block by the Town Council. Next, we'll explain the reasoning behind the original wording of the targeted regulations. We'll highlight important potential impacts if these amendments and new ordinances are adopted. Last, we'll have a public conversation and solicit input from the audience. All right, Mike?
Thank you, Jesse. Some of you know me, some of you don't. As Jesse said, I was the planning director here for 18 plus years. Had a lot to do with the ordinances that are being considered here in the near future. I want to open with a little introductory commentary, and then I'll be moving on to the slides. First of all, I want you to know that I have written or co-written or reviewed dozens of ordinances for not only the town of Narragansett, but for the city of Cranston, where I worked for 19 years prior to my work here. I evolved a really good, what I consider a really solid approach to undertake appropriate research when you're writing an ordinance, to review the related enabling law or laws, to look at the technical needs as well as the technical standards that might be necessary, and to share, consider success stories from other communities around the state, around the country. That process served me quite well over the years in order to make sure that I had an opportunity to get information addressing the particular issue at hand. In the end, once I did that amount of work, I would always look back at my town's comprehensive plan to make certain that the standards, the drafted text of an ordinance was appropriate and in compliance with the policies and goals of the comprehensive plan.
Mike, you're not going through the PA.
I'm not. Okay, thank you. So you really got to eat this much. Thanks for telling me. All right. So what I want to do right now is to give you a little background on three of the ordinances that are going to be considered tonight, and tell you a little bit about what their objectives were. The first one is the site plan review ordinance. Site plan review is woven through many chapters of the zoning ordinance. It was installed back in the 1980s when the resource overlays were created for the town. There were 5 resource overlays. I won't get into all that detail. But Narragansett, the reason those resource overlays were created was that Narragansett at the time was the fastest growing town in the state. And there were concerns raised by numerous taxpayer residents for harmful alteration of our wetlands, our coastal areas, floodplains, etc. At the time, the Building Inspections Department was a subset of the Community Development Department. And that meant that the zoning officer worked under the Community Development staff.
Is there any way to get a little more volume? It's still very difficult to hear.
So building inspections is part of the Community Development Office, and it made sense at the time for the Community Development staff to accept applications for zoning relief, variances, special use permits. Because the majority of the zoning board cases were seeking relief from the overlays, particularly at that time, the town council required that all zoning cases had to be vetted through the planning board. The staff over the years worked with applicants and went out of their way to meet with anyone so that they could understand that process and allow the staff to guide them through that process. The second regulations that I do want to speak a little bit about is the bulk zoning regulations. All the dimensional regulations in the zoning code, setbacks, height, lot size, they're all a form of bulk regulation. So when people say, oh, these new bulk regulations, they're terrible. Everything that's quantified in the zoning ordinance is a bulk regulation. Recent changes arose from objections to very large homes being built on very small lots. These issues were raised by members of the public, abutters to zoning cases, who were coming to the zoning board meetings and the planning board meetings, contacting their council members and the town manager. And so it was deemed as very important that we had to do something about these oversized homes. Before we had a floor area ratio regulation, and I'll get into a little bit of that in a minute, any person could build a home in the majority of our town that is zoned R10, 10,000 square foot lots, covering 25% of the lot. So in a 10,000 square foot lot, that'd be a 2,500 square foot. So in the vast majority of our town is zoned for quarter acre lots, 10,000 square feet. Prior to any floor area regulation, you could build a 2,500 square foot footprint house, 3 stories tall, 7,500 square feet on a 10,000 square foot lot. And unfortunately, in some cases, some of the applications approach that. Commercial developers took advantage of this and bought up a lot of homes, as we all know, particularly during the COVID time, and led to some very large houses being built, extensive paving, loss of yard space, and very little and impact on the surrounding neighborhood, with on-street parking taking over lengthy areas of the roads. So I just introduced the concept of floor area ratio. I want you all to know, without getting into the math, that the premise of a floor area ratio is that the home is proportional to the lot it's built on. So that if you have a small lot, you should have a fairly small home. If you have a big lot, you can have a big home. And in fact, the floor area ratio regulation, as it was passed, as it sits on the code today, does not impact lots that exceed 20,000 square feet. It doesn't apply. Only half-acre lots and smaller. That's the second. The third issue I want to discuss is discretionary zoning changes. There was a lot made of this a couple of years ago because it changes a lot of regulations. This was done in response directly to a change in the state law related to modifications. Now here's another term you need to know. Modifications are not zoning variances because they're small variations. But a modification, the concept of modification was allowed in the state law since 1991 as an option. Our town did not choose to exercise that option until 2023, when the General Assembly altered the state law and made it mandatory. So now, a 5% modification is mandatory and can be approved with no formal action of any board at all. The building inspector can issue that. 5% relief would be if you have a 10-foot setback, 5% that would be half of a foot. The other thing that comes through on this new state law is that it allows up to 15% modification with notice to direct abutters and a 14-day wait period. The planning board had an ongoing concern about this because they had just seen all these McMansions being built on small lots, and suddenly the state law is changing such that the building inspector has to issue approvals up to 15% without there being any sort of a public hearing. So the planning board assigned a special subcommittee, and they reviewed every dimensional requirement in the zoning ordinance, and they rewrote over 400 dimensional requirements. The community development staff took that information, put it into ordinance format, and brought it to the town council after the planning board had taken a vote on it, and the town council approved that. So these are things you're going to hear throughout the rest of the evening. I just want you to know those are the reasons behind those 3 very important regulations. Now, what I am going to be presenting is 6 slides, and they should go a little faster than this. The first pair of slides is just a listing of the proposed ordinances. The second pair of slides describes the impact of the key provisions of those ordinances, and the third pair describes what I consider major failings of the proposed ordinances. 2 key points before we move along. What I'll be covering right now is really just the surface. I can't get into the detail. It would take way longer than we have time for tonight. And secondly, and most importantly, every one of these ordinances that I'm going to show you that are listed on this slide here as chapter such and such were vetted through the town's legal staff and was given the go-ahead as compliant with state law at the time. So, what you're looking at here are 8 different chapters of the code, another little piece of education. When an ordinance is brought before the town council and it is approved, it is given a chapter number. That chapter number is merely an indexing number. The body of that ordinance then gets lifted out and put into the main zoning ordinance that, if you will look up on our website, you look for Appendix A of the town code, you would find the zoning ordinance. So these chapters are just forms of indexing all the actions that the town council takes to amend the town zone. The lower numbers are older, the higher numbers are newer. So 1099 was done in, chapter 1099 was done in 2022. And it removes a paragraph. It revises site plan review regulation related to zoning variances and special use permits. It removes a paragraph describing the purpose of site plan review. I don't know why anyone would want to take away a purpose. Chapter 1100, deletes sections of the bulk zoning ordinance, particularly definitions of floor area and how it is calculated, including areas that are exempt. It removes floor area ratio application to residential development on lots of less than 20,000 square feet. And it removes the special parking requirements for homes with 5 bedrooms or more. 1108 deletes sections of the wetland overlay regulation, particularly definition of coastal wetland and the definition of freshwater wetland. It also deletes wetland districts definitions and special review uses. It also deletes sections already deleted by a previous town council. Chapter 1109 says it revises the regulation for college students. I think all of you are aware of that. The town set a limit of 3 college students per household, and this revision to chapter 1100 would change it from 3 to 5, presumably to be consistent with the revisions that are referenced in section 1119 for the number of people allowed, unrelated people allowed in the household. Moving to 1117, that revises our restaurant zoning regulations. It makes restaurants a permitted use in business zones and 1 industrial zone. It removes minimum side setbacks. It also revises zoning application process and the interpretation of land uses not specifically listed in the table of uses. And it would remove the 2-family dwelling lot area standard for the R80 zones. All these things I'm telling you right now are the proposed revisions, not the original. Moving to 1118, that reverses the discretionary dimensional standards that I just mentioned, all 400 of them. Chapter 1119 would revise the definitions of households and unrelated individuals. It would revise the definition of household. It would create a definition of unrelated individuals. And it revises the number of unrelated individuals that can occupy the home from 3 to 5. That's the point. Chapter 1124 is a rather lengthy chapter. It makes 2-family dwellings permitted by right in all residential zones. It changes dimensional regulations in the zoning table, which conflict with previous changes in chapter 1118. It removes standards for residential special use permits, and that's a problem because there are certain special use permits required for multifamily dwellings, cluster developments, hotels, motels, and several other sorts of residential uses. And importantly, it removes the administrative authority to waive standards for affordable housing developments. Next slide. This slide shows 6 proposed amendments. These are not proposed to change a previous chapter. These are new. And they, again, the first one would eliminate wetland and coastal resource overlays completely. The second would change the use code table regarding alcohol service. The third would eliminate expedited review near wetlands and coastal overlays. The fourth would eliminate planning board involvement in site plan review process. The fifth would eliminate the planning board authority to require a site plan. And the last would remove the reference to wetland and coastal resource overlays in the comprehensive plan baseline report, which is kind of odd, since the baseline report is a gathering of facts identifying the conditions that were in place in 2013 on which the comprehensive plan was built. Next. So the impact of these proposed revisions, there's over 50 pages of regulation being revised or reversed, with no explanation yet to the public, at least to date. It removes planning board from the process of site plan review, as I mentioned, reverses the floor area ratio and the related bulk zoning regulations in Breakwater Village. Breakwater Village has had a floor area ratio regulation since 2009. They asked for it. They asked me to help them write it. I attended a meeting in this room with 60 or 70 of their residents to discuss how that would work. It also would remove all zoning dimensional standards that were adopted to offset the mandatory 15% modification. So sorry, I'm duplicating myself there. It makes two-family dwellings allowed by right in all residential districts except in R40 zones and with no set lot area requirement. It removes 2 of our 5 natural resource overlays. I initiate, at the outset I mentioned that we created these natural resource overlays in the 1980s when the town was moving so fast that it was seen as necessary that we needed to put some regulations in place to save our very delicate beaches, marshes, coastal areas, etc. And they have been working fine for 35 years. It eliminates parking setback standards for multifamily dwellings and cluster subdivisions. It changes the limit of college students, we already said that. It changes the limit of unrelated persons allowed in one dwelling, and adds that new definition. And it authorizes expansion of legal non-conforming restaurants to allow sale of beer and wine by right in 5 residential zones and 1 industrial zone. So, my interpretation, and I've only read these 14 things over 4 or 5 times, so I may still be missing a few things. There are technical errors. Removing the allowance for review of a variance and special use permit together. This is in the weeds, and I'm not going to go deep, but there was a time when you couldn't do a special use permit and a variance. And they do 2 different things. That law changed, the state law changed several years ago, and we amended the zoning code to be in compliance with that. Now we'll take that away. It eliminates transmittal of the variance applications from the zoning board to the planning board. That regulation is still in the state zoning enabling law. It doesn't say that the planning board reviews the site plans. It just says that the planning board has to receive every single one. Taking it away. I couldn't think of a better heading, so I just used what came to mind. Swiss cheese remnants. This is really probably the most important aspect of this in the big picture, because the amendments that are proposed to the 14 ordinances that we've been reviewing selectively take out certain things, but they don't take out everything, and they don't put anything else back in to replace. So we have remnant standards without policies. We have remnant policies without standards. It will lead to a nightmare for the building official and the zoning board to enforce. And it could lead to very, very costly court appeals. The proposed amendments will leave regulations, particularly site plan review, bulk zoning, and expedited reviews, with dislocated standards, as I said. Now there are unneeded changes. Eliminating the need for a site plan to be submitted for zoning variance applications. Well, anyone who's ever been to the zoning board knows that you have to provide a site review, a site plan, so that you can show the board what you're trying to do. It will remove coastal resources overlay district regulations. The Coastal Resources Overlay District is not the Wetland Overlay District. I know these things sound similar, but they're not. And the state law that removed our right to have a wetland overlay did not remove our right to have a coastal resource overlay. So we can keep it. It's being proposed to be removed. It changes the number of college student limit. Okay, I don't want to get into that too much, except to say, remind people that there was a court case that went to Rhode Island Supreme Court from the city of Providence. It validated the city of Providence's right to limit the number of college students. They chose 3. That court case validated 3. I don't know how it would be affected, how Narragansett would be affected by that. I would suggest legal analysis of that be done. And it allows restaurants and industrial zones by right. I'm not even gonna respond to that. Thank you, Tom. There are also procedural confusions that are caused. It's inconsistent internally in regard to staff responsibilities. This is that Swiss cheese thing. The community development staff and the building inspection staff work closely together to provide support to the zoning board. With some of the things that are being taken out, it's hard to determine what responsibilities are in the community development office and what responsibilities are going to be left in the building inspections / zoning officer office. That needs to be resolved. There's no account for zoning board referrals to the planning board. In the state law says the zoning boards can refer anything that they have in front of them to the planning board. But it takes that away. And chapter 1117, this is just my own personal feeling about it. There was 89 pages to the original 1117. Only 12 pages of that were being amended. If you saw the advertisement in the newspaper, there was a lot of text there that wasn't underlined, it wasn't being changed. It shouldn't have had to be in there. The way it was formatted, it had to. So it is what it is. It resulted in some stricter standards. Now, presumably the idea behind all of this is to soften things up, expedite reviews, solve some problems, make some people not have to go to zoning board early. Well, it removes the allowance for 2-family dwellings in R10 and R20 zones. Just, we put it in, it's in chapter 1109, and it's being taken out in chapter 1124. It eliminates administrative approval of minor relief for construction in the coastal overlay. There's a section in the zoning code, section 16, that says that if you're far enough away from a wetland or from a coastal resource, you don't have to go to the zoning board. You just have to perform to these particular criteria, and you will be able to get approved. And that has saved zoning boards and people applying to zoning boards hours upon hours of their time. Now that's being taken away as it relates to the coastal resource overlay. And last but not least, it may violate procedural law. As I mentioned, these approved chapters are indexes of changes that are made to the master code called the zoning ordinance. And amending the chapters, to me, I've never seen that. And I've been working, as you saw, as you heard, I've been involved in the planning function in the town for 3 decades. I've never seen a chapter that's already been approved come back and get revised. And it does not account, last but not least, it does not account for the need for a comprehensive, for a public hearing before the planning board for any amendments to the comprehensive plan. So the one comprehensive plan amendment, it seems as though the council may feel as though they've gotten an advisory comment from the planning board. Now they can go ahead and do what they want. No, the state law, chapter 4522.2, the state law states that the planning board must also hold its own public hearing. That's all I have.
Wow, good job.
Thank you both. Great work. Great job. So, I don't know if anyone's confused at all about anything that Mike said. We know that that is a lot to try to digest and to understand, and it is confusing in general. But what we wanted to do was lay all of that out, because those are all in what has been sent to the planning board from the town council. So we want to make that totally clear. All of those are proposed amendments that are being considered at this time. What we are going to do tonight is let Mike kind of go through that process of that presentation. We're going to give you a different perspective when Terry comes up in a minute as a planning board member. You'll get another perspective when you hear from Deb as a town council member. And then I promise you, we will make this more understandable to everyone towards the end with some visuals and just wrap things up nice and neat so you understand what could potentially happen if these amendments do go through. So that's going to be a little bit later.
Good evening. Terry Fleming, I've just finished in 2023, 30 years on the planning board, the last 20 as chair of the planning board, and I've been deeply involved in the issues that we're talking about tonight, particularly the bulk zoning and the discretionary zoning, site review, and the others. Taller than Mike. How's that? Okay. Thanks. I wanted to give you some historical perspective on really the main things that I was. Can you go back to the other slide? Yeah, thanks. The main things that I was involved with as the chair of the planning board. But just quickly, the process. The process was always to meet with the town council, meet with the staff, when we were working on big initiatives, whether it was from the impetus of the council or the planning board or from public input. There was a process where we held always extensive workshops. We brought in technical expertise. We brought in public input. And it was a lengthy process. And my observation of this, and I haven't been on the planning board since 2023, but this seems very rushed and done in a very compressed time frame, and I don't see all those steps that we always took. And I worked with very different town councils over, as you know, over the 20 years, from the Matt Mannix Council to the Jesse Pugh Council, and everything in between. And there was always a very healthy dialogue between the planning board and the town council and the public as we vetted these various issues. So my observation is I'm not sure that process has been met in this instance as well as it has in the past. I did want to just bring some perspective to FAR, floor area ratio, and discretionary zoning. The people of Breakwater Village came to us back in 2009. They wanted to build out their properties there, but they wanted some control and some safety. And I give them all the credit in the world. We developed, through the expertise of the staff and the input of the public, the floor area ratio, which, you know, Breakwater Village is a unique place, but those people have been able to upgrade their properties and still keep a very safe environment that isn't as congested as it could have been if we hadn't implemented these floor area ratios. It's been a tremendous benefit to Breakwater Village. And there's a section of the code that required anybody who was upgrading their property, I believe Michael can correct me, that had to come to the planning board. But I can tell you, since 2009, every one of those proposals, except for one, and that was quickly revised, complied with the ordinance as it was written. Everyone in Breakwater got on board and designed their property to comply with that. And the result, I think, has been tremendous. When, as Mike alluded to, the buildings, the houses started to be built later on that were oversized for lots, at one point, the town council put a moratorium. And the town council at that time came to us, came to Mike, came to the planning board, said we have to do something. And we took the floor area ratio concept and we applied it. And it absolutely is geared to houses related to the lot size. The house is proportional to the lot size. It makes perfect sense. We don't have these houses, since we implemented this, looming over the neighbors, creating, a situation that's uncomfortable for people, because, quite frankly, people want to maximize their property. I get that. But if you look at the floor area ratio, and again, Mike made the point, we only put it in for the smaller lots, 20,000 or less, because those are the lots that were being impacted by the larger homes. We did this very prudently, very judiciously. We didn't rush this. And we used the breakwater example, and we developed the floor area ratio for the rest of the town. And I got to tell you, I think it's worked tremendously. If you look at the square footage of living space that you can have relative to your lot size, go home and look on the tax database. Look at your lot size. Look at the square footage and what you can build. You can still build. And Jesse will have some visuals. You can still build a nice house proportional to the lot size. That being said, we went back and went back a year afterwards to adjust anything we thought wasn't working. And we involved the council again, and we involved the public again. And we made some revisions to the original floor area ratio bulk zoning regulations to make it more appropriate for everyone. So I think there's been a positive aspect of FAR. I'm not sure why it's being attacked. Because I think, and the last thing is, as you know, there's issues in this town where people don't agree. We have disparate groups on various issues, and we can name some of them, and I've gone head to head with a lot of people probably in this room at the planning board on a number of issues over time. But boy, floor area ratio was universally embraced by people in this town. And I think the results have been positive. Next one. So with respect to the housing laws of 2023 and the discretionary zoning, I reiterate again what Mike said and what other people have said. Of those 23 laws, every mandate in those laws, the planning board recommended that the council implement, and every one of those mandates the council implemented. I don't know where the notion is coming that we're out of compliance, at least with that set of laws, because we're not. And that was done, every mandate was put in, which it had to be, right? State mandated it. We didn't ignore that. But the thing that was most disturbing to the planning board was, and I'll editorialize a little here, a virtually automatic 15% increase in size. So Mike talked about that. You're a town that sets dimensional regulations, height, lot coverage, setbacks, floor area. This law that went in allows you to get, by filing paperwork with your neighbors, your abutters, a 15% increase in that. Yeah, we didn't see the logic in that. Some people from the State House on down started to roll that out as a boon to affordable housing, which I don't know how a single-family home that's 15% bigger can be contributing to the affordable housing crisis. In fact, the house is going to be less affordable down the road. So, and again, my editorializing, we saw this, the planning board, after a lot of hearings, that this was a bonus basically for builders and developers and homeowners to get another 15% in their property. If you don't like the dimensional setbacks or height or lot coverage, then focus on that and have hearings on that. Don't just give people 15% bonus. So the planning board and the town council decided to adjust our dimensional table so that when people came in and got the 15 and filed the paperwork, they'd be back to the original levels of setbacks, lot coverage, etc. That seemed to make sense to everybody. Apparently there's a motion to go back to the original dimensional table. table, which you then realize there'll be 15% more on top of that. There was also a concern that there's added work. I stood up at 2 council meetings and said to the town council, the planning department and the building inspector department is going to have a tremendous amount of extra work. And you need to fund them, you need to give them resources. Whether that's been done or not, I'm not sure. But the law created the extra work. People talk about jumping through hoops, red tape, bureaucracy. The law created that, not our adjustment of the dimensional table. Because it's my opinion, you can all decide, no matter where you set the dimensions, if somebody can get 15% more by filing some paperwork, then they're going to do it. So it doesn't matter where the dimensional table was. This 15% is something to deal with. And I understand there's a pending bill that might make it 30%. Now, that second 15 may be optional, but if the town council, this one or the next one, implements that into the code, then they can have 30% more. So that's why we adjusted the dimensional table. And it does cause problems, but again, my position is the law caused the problems, not the adjustment in the table. And finally, on site reviews, I've seen so much positive come out of site reviews over the years when people go to the planning board and they get the input of the planning board. And oftentimes they revise their proposals before they go to the zoning board, or they tell us we're all wet, whatever. But there's been a tremendous, I think, a valuable role of the planning board in advising the zoning board on site reviews. I think in my conversations with people and my discussions with people about what's going on, there seems to be a lot of misconceptions about the volume of cases. Again, there seems to be this red tape and bureaucracy and jumping through hoops, but not everybody has to go to the planning board. There's some misconceptions that if you build a deck or a shed or a garage, you have to go to the planning board. You don't. If you design your addition in conformance with the code, you just go see Mr. Pimentel and get a building permit. In fact, I looked into some numbers. It's approximately 90% of the cases in 2024, approximately 90% of the permits in 2024 that relate to these 2 ordinances, these 2 sections, FAR and bulk zoning, that were just obtained through the building inspector's office. And merely 33 site reviews where people went to the planning board. So this notion that there's this flood of cases to the planning board just isn't borne out by the numbers. And folks, you go to the planning board to get a variance. The variance is sort of a benign word for special favor, extra, more. You get more, you're asking for more than what the code allows. People should understand, and I've always felt that if you're asking for more, you should go before the boards and justify why you're getting that. Otherwise, comply with the ordinance. But if you want more, you have every right to ask for it. But go to the boards and ask for it. And justify it. Don't bypass the planning board. Don't get the 15%. So, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about that. And I think that was all I had. The site review, again, I personally think there's a tremendous value for people to go to the planning board and the zoning board. And I understand that people have to incur costs, legal costs, engineering costs. I get all that, and that's not good. But when you go to the planning board and the zoning board, you're asking for a variance. You're asking for an exception. You're not just complying with the ordinance.
No, can you hear me out there? I'm not a giant. Good evening. I'm also not a community development expert, and I'm going to read from my not notes, but actually words. Nor am I a planning and zoning expert, even after 4 years on the town council. However, I was responsible for 1 vote of 5 on a vast array of the creation and or modification through amendments of zoning ordinances throughout those 4 years. First, though, I spoke with a couple of town council members over the past couple of weeks. I think I understand that the objective of this exercise was for members of the council to learn more about the processes of zoning and zoning changes, how the planning board works, and how best to obtain the necessary information to become knowledgeable about the history and reasoning for new and amended ordinances related to the topics we've heard tonight. I was not well schooled in these very topics when I joined the town council. I was fortunate to have 3 members of my first council who had worked with very seasoned planning and zoning boards, as well as a long-time community development staff, all of whom were willing to help me learn what I needed to know. I'm still not an expert. But during this education, what I absolutely learned was that the best way to get to understand this area of municipal government was to ask questions, attend planning and zoning meetings, if I could, and work in tandem with these 2 boards. The best way to do this, I think, is to have public workshops on a given issue so that the council and the boards can meet, discuss, debate, and decide the next steps. For those of you who might not be fully aware of the Open Meetings Act, in a nutshell, the council and the boards are required by law to meet in public on nearly all issues that come before them. So the public is always invited. Frankly, during my term, very few residents actually attended the workshops, but we often came to understand an issue through this process, and if there were divergent opinions, they could be the reason usually for the planning board to go back and produce alternative recommendations for the town council. In fact, the lack of workshops to review and consider planning board recommendations in my second term on several topics caused me to vote against or abstain from voting for some serious issues because I felt there was more to understand and potentially would result in better results by doing so. We've heard this evening from individuals far more knowledgeable about many of these issues than I am, but I'd like to spend a couple of minutes highlighting some of the issues that have been important to me and that I have found resonating with the residents of Narragansett during my service on the council. I'll try to be brief. Regarding bulk zoning, I was on the council that finally approved the bulk zoning ordinance after several years of creating the requirements, as you've heard tonight. I distinctly remember Mike DeLuca saying as we considered our votes that it was likely that some elements of the ordinance might require future tweaking, which happened about 18 months after the ordinance became municipal law in Narragansett, as you've also already heard. In fact, you probably heard most of the things I'm about to say. I live in the south end of Narragansett, an area that for the most part consisted of small ranch houses and cottages on small, sometimes substandard lots. There were also neighborhoods created in the 1960s and 70s that were planned communities, including bi-level and sometimes 2-story homes. In recent times, several of these homes were torn down in their places, and in their places were overwhelming houses, 2 and 3 stories, 5 to 8 bedrooms on these same size lots, annihilating views for long-term residents and almost always stretching across permeable land to create parking spaces and large, sometimes 2-story decks. Over time, many of these structures became rental units, which impacted the sense of community. I also would like to bring to your attention some comments made by the Community Development Director during the council meeting for the first reading of bulk zoning. He said, in response, or he told us about, in response to the previous town council's imposition of a moratorium on building of large dwellings, 5 bedrooms or more, the community development staff with the town clerk, the town solicitor, fire marshal, and building officials departments have drafted a series of regulatory provisions to ensure that future residential development be regulated to be in scale to the individual property and the surrounding neighborhoods. That's the basis for bulk zoning. He goes on, the attached draft provisions address the definition of a bedroom, bunk room, hardscape, softscape, floor area ratio, gross lot area, and net lot area, the difference being usually wetlands. In addition, the provisions that follow provide a clear, enforceable set of criteria to ensure that no individual lot be overbuilt to the extent of having a detrimental impact on site, on public rights of way, or the surrounding private properties. So my deepest concern was, and still is, the impact on our environment. This paradise that we live in has a limited ability to serve the requirements of more and more people. We regularly run the risk of severe water restrictions in town. We have limited capacity for removal of sewage by sewer and septic. The lack of permeable land covered by overlarge structures, driveways, etc., results in stormwater runoff that pollutes our waterways, including the Salt Pond, the Narrow River, and the Atlantic Ocean. Bulk zoning, in a purposeful way, was created to ensure many supportive issues for our town, but the most important for me are those that I note above. Specifically, parking setbacks, wetland restrictions, including overlays, floor area ratio, and dimensional standards all play a role in preventing an environmental disaster in our beautiful town. The revisions last year of the dimensional standards, determining the size of houses on substandard lots of 10,000 square feet, was an answer to state law changes that would have allowed for larger homes. That revision retains the original standard, including the increase allotted by the state, which Terry was just commenting on. So in other words, essentially what we did was we fixed it so that we still would not have larger houses as a result of that 15% automatic increase. With regard to natural resource overlays, as I noted above, the town of Narragansett is part of some of the most fragile coastal land in our state. It is important that we have regulations protecting these areas from construction that impedes the maintenance of the waterway, the species of native flora and fauna that help to ensure that the ecosystem is sustained. This is not a battle about affordable housing. It is a battle of ensuring an inhabitable earth for future generations. I've heard the argument that is generically called property rights. Usually the term means property owners should have the right to do whatever they want on their own land. When I've been confronted with that concept, my answer has been, well, we all have property rights. And one of the most precious is our right to peaceful habitation, or the Declaration of Independence states, the pursuit of happiness. The problem is that land is really part of a continuum, abutting other land, both private and public. There's an argument that larger homes will allow more affordable housing. I would ask, how? With a median-priced house in Narragansett at over $800,000, I think it is naive of anyone to assume that new homeowners, including families of first responders, teachers, and others who could enhance our community, would not be out of reach. Elimination of the FAR requirement is inappropriate. Since the bulk zoning ordinance was passed, a review based on issues raised by residents and builders resulted in changes specifically to property areas that could be removed from the ordinance, and they were. And that was later, after, just as Mike suggested was going to happen. If we have a need to amend the ordinance, then we need to discuss that and decide how. The revision to Chapter 1119 in Section 1 called definitions for household is sloppy and unclear. I never cared for the definition of unrelated persons. In this case, should this section, which is called Section B, be revised with more specific wording, it would be unnecessary. Finally, I noticed in the town council request to the planning board that no reason was included with the exception of concern about being aligned with new state law. The planning board spent countless hours last year in conjunction with the community development department reviewing, evaluating, providing the prior council with significant changes to affected ordinances and chapters to adhere to the changes made by the General Assembly that were signed into law in 2023 and 2024. I do intend to speak at the public hearing, but my preference would be that the town council consider voting against this process and instead create a series of workshops to get clear understanding of each of these items and then deciding what really needs to be considered afterwards. Given the significant work already completed by the planning board, these workshops could be efficient and effective ways to explain the background and get a clear understanding of why some portions of this referral were included.
Quick public service announcement. I found this in the ladies' room if it belongs to anyone. Before things get wild. Do I have a taker? Yes, come on down. Continue.
All right. Thank you, Terry and Deb. Thank you both. So we've heard quite a bit of a lot of talking, a lot of opinions, a lot of details on these amendments, across all of them. But I want to get to the meat of it, so we can show people out here what this could lead to if these amendments were to pass. And I'll say it again, these are proposed. There's a ton of amendments. There's no guarantee that Any specific ones will be approved by the town council. But we're making the assumption that since they have been referred, any of them could pass. Until they're taken off the board, until they're voted down, there's a possibility of any of these being implemented. So let's talk about how this will affect everyone out here, because these are, for the most part, town-wide changes affecting all neighborhoods, unless you're in unless you have a lot over 20,000 square feet. It won't affect you directly, but it will affect your neighbors if they have smaller lots, which then does, potentially affect you. So, Tom, why don't we go to the next slide? So I'm going to show some visuals on what could be built right now, what could be built if some of these changes are put in place. So we're going to focus on two of these amendments. What we've been focusing on for most of the night, which is the bulk zoning amendments, which includes floor area ratio. So the proposal currently would be to just remove floor area ratio from the town. So that would no longer exist, and it would go back to how things were done prior to 2020, prior to when floor area ratio was put into place. So that's one thing we're focusing on. The other is the discretionary zoning from the state, so that 15% bonus. So when you put those things together, that's where you end up with, in my opinion, I would say extreme results. So let's look at right, dimensional, the 15% bonus affects everyone, no matter what, across town. Right, thank you. So what we're looking at here is this is an actual lot on Old Pine Road in Metatuxet. I don't have the address on there, but this is someone's lot. And they currently, so this lot is 8,138 square feet. So that's less than a fifth of an acre. So it's a small lot, it's a substandard lot, a smaller lot. Right now, currently, there's a 2 or 3 bedroom ranch house on that lot. It's 1,000 square feet, definitely on the smaller side. However, that house has been there for decades. It has served a purpose. It can work for a smaller family. It can work for retired people. We need houses like that in town as well. So that right now, this is what's there, 1,000 square foot home. Let's see the next slide. So currently, right now, before any changes have been made by any town council, under our current laws in town, this is with floor area ratio in place, and this is with the adjusted dimensional table that the town council put in place to counteract that 15% bonus to get back to a baseline. Currently, today, the owner of that property could rebuild or renovate that house, and they could get up to 2,604 square feet of living space. That's what you could get on that house. So again, a small lot, and I think most people would agree that is a decent sized house on a smaller lot. So that's now. So I'm of the opinion that this is not some sort of ultra restrictive ordinance that the town has put in place. I think it works. It makes it a proportionate home, but still a good size home. So that's currently now. So let's see what would happen if bulk zoning floor area ratio was erased, and if the dimensional table went back to how it used to be, which results in a 15% bonus in dimensions. Let's see that. So same lot, still 8,138 square feet. If all amended ordinances were as sent to the planning board, if those were passed by the town council, the following day after that vote, an homeowner could put in a permit to do this, and they would have the right to do it. So I just want to be clear: when it's by right, the town cannot stop anyone from building something like this. So they have the right to do it. And if the town tries to stop them, or the planning board tries to stop them, it would never go to planning. That homeowner or that developer could sue the town and say, this is my right, because it's in the ordinances. So 8,138 square feet, a fifth of an acre. You could build a 7,019 square foot home, 3 stories. That would also, that house could be over 40 feet instead of 35, which is what we currently have. We have a 35-foot height limit. That 15% applies to all dimensions. So all new houses can go up to 40 feet. if those dimensions are rolled back. What this doesn't include, because I wanted to not throw everything in there, it could also have a finished basement, so that'd be another 2,000 something square feet. So now we're up to 9,000. And if the state does go through with the increased bonus, the 30% bonus, that house could then be almost 50 feet high. And you could get another story in there. So you'd have about 11,000 something square foot house on an 8,000 square foot lot, and it could be 4 stories high. And this isn't like speculation or extreme cases. This could be done. And if you're building a house because you want it to be a short-term rental, then you're going to build as big as you can because you get as many bedrooms as you can. So that's that 8,000 square foot lot. Let's go to a 10,000 square foot lot. So a lot of times we use 10,000 square feet as kind of like a standard sized lot in North End neighborhoods, Metatuxet, Eastward Luck as well, Briggs Farm probably. All the neighborhoods where families still live in Narragansett. 10,000 square foot lot. That's not substandard, right? Standard lot, right? So currently, today, before anything's changed, you would be able to build a 3,100 square foot house on that quarter acre lot. 3,100 square feet, pretty good. That's what you can do right now. Let's see the next slide. If the proposals do go through as proposed, that would result in a 8,625 square foot home. And I don't even know if we want to talk about what you could do if you went up to 50 feet on that one. So this would be the result of the proposed amendments if passed as proposed. That's the reality of it. That could be built, and probably would be built in certain cases at least. But the thing is, we don't have to prognosticate or speculate on if people would do this, because we know people will do that. We can show the next slide. Oh, actually, I have a couple more. So if you do have someone who buys up 3 lots, side by side, or maybe just talk about 20 years in the future, this is the kind of layout you can potentially have in your neighborhoods if people are building out to the full potential of their lots. I don't think anyone is looking forward to that sort of environment to live in. And this is a case where everyone's building like that. But what if you haven't renovated your house? What if you kept your house? We can see what that looks like. So maybe you're that house in the middle. Hopefully you don't have solar panels on your house because you're not going to be getting much sun in that case. So again, I think these visuals do help to simplify this because we really talk about a lot of abstractions when we talk about the numbers and the dimensions. The best way to understand this is to see what could be built with these changes. So let's go to the next slide. I was talking about speculation and trying to guess and see if people would do this kind of thing or imagine what it would be like. So this is a property on Sylvan Road in Eastward Luck. This is pre-2019. This was done right before the town put bulk zoning into place. So why don't we see what this turned into? So when we show those diagrams and those renderings of what could be built, again, we're not imagining what could be built. We know exactly what will be built because it's already happened, and that's why bulk zoning is in place. And I will add, this was done in, I guess, 2020, 2021. You would have this, but this would be 15% bigger than it is right now. So, right. It could be a 2-family. There are a lot of possibilities, but certainly it would be 15% bigger because you'd have that bonus if those changes were made. So that's that. Want to go to the next slide? All right, so 2 more slides, and then we're going to go to the public for any questions or statements or whatever you want to say. Let's talk about what the potential paths are for the town council. They may have additional paths. These are ones we've identified. Over the next few months. So first of all, there will be a public hearing opened on all these amendments, May 5th. so a couple weeks from now. The town council may open that public hearing. There are so many amendments and so many things to discuss that they may leave that open and continue it over several meetings, because it is, I think most people would believe, too much to handle in one night. I don't know if that's ideal for the public, because what that means then is that you have to also, if you want to have any input, you need to also go to all of that series of meetings, which is just a lot of work for the public to do. It puts a lot on individuals to go and state their case. One other option would be the town council could potentially discuss the various ordinances individually, and then once they close the public hearing, they can have a series of motions where they vote individually on these. That does make things somewhat complicated, because again, it strings things out for a long time. You're not going back and having workshops and getting input and recommendation from planning. So what they can't do in that case is they can't substantially change these amendments for what was sent to planning, because the public hearing was advertised in a certain way with certain amendments. So the town council can't then say, well, we want to make, this was, we don't agree with the way this was laid out. We want to make bigger changes, but still pass this. They can't do that. That has to go back to the planning board, and the process has to start all over again. So if the town council did say, we want to make some significant changes, they're going to have to go back to planning. So again, not the greatest process, really. Third, the town council could decide that they bit off too much in one go. And even though there may still be initiatives and changes that they want to make, it would be more proper to vote this down. It was sent in a block, you vote it down in a block, and say, we do want to make changes, but we're going to do this one by one. We're going to work with the planning board and say, this is the problem that we're looking to solve. How do we go about that? Because what was done in this case was amendments were made already and sent to planning. So then you can't really get a recommendation back. The recommendation is either we agree with your changes or we disagree with your changes, and that's what the planning board did. If you want to have a discussion, you say, we have this goal, we have this problem, let's talk about this, and then come up with a solution. So my opinion is that the third option would be the best, because you're doing it methodically, logically, and not rushing anything. Anyway, those are a few paths the town council could take. There are probably others. Those are the ones we're looking at tonight. Let's go to the last slide. So let's talk about things that individuals can do that are here tonight, or maybe they're not here, friends of yours that you talk to. First thing, attend the public hearing on May 5th. Again, that will probably not be settled that night, but you will have a chance to speak. And I can tell you, as someone who was on the town council, and I think Deb would agree, that if you're on the town council, you want to hear from the public. You don't want to only hear from the same people all the time. You don't want to be in a bubble. You want to hear from people that maybe are not normally engaged, that come out because they care about it, and they give their opinion. So the best thing that anyone can do is to make their voice heard at a meeting, so that the town council knows that there are different opinions than what they may, the preconceived notions that they may have. Second, email the town council. If you can't go to a meeting or you don't want to go to a meeting, you can email the town council your thoughts, towncouncil@narragansettri.gov. Also, you can find them on the town website. And last, spread the word, tell your friends. The reason we're having this tonight is not to blame anyone, not to get anyone in an uproar, but to let people know what is happening, because we had a sense that people were not aware that this was a possibility and there was potential for these changes, and everyone should be aware. So that's the goal, really. Tom? All right, so that's it. Thank you. Again, I'll reiterate, no one has to be on camera. Let me know if you ask a question and you'd rather it not be public. We'll delete that out.
Can I ask a question? These changes were made obviously for a reason, and I haven't yet heard what the reason are. You said you make changes to solve a problem.
That's a good question. We can't answer that because we're not on the town council, so that would be really a question for the town council. There was, if you look back to the March 3rd motion, the town council made, they do list their reasoning, which I believe was to be in compliance with state law, and it may have been for affordable housing, but again, I would look at that motion to see what reason they gave, and then you can email the council and ask them that question.
Yeah, they just said, last night's town council meeting, coming up on May 5th, I guess, the new one, they're gonna have a public hearing first before this one. So they did mention that, it'll start, but it'll probably get pushed back a little bit, so. And I guess it's a lengthy one,
So,
I'm not sure.
here, actually, so he said there was maybe a public hearing happening before the May 5th one? Is that
No,
what you-
May 5th is another public hearing, that's what they were saying, but not for the Vulcan, there's another one.
The one that they discussed last night? Right, so
Is that what
those
it
are
is?
some,
One from
There
last
could be more
night?
than one. There could be more than one.
Yeah, and they said it's gonna be lengthy, so they said that they'll start it, but they're gonna push it back again.
I think that was like later in May, right, like the 19th or 15th?
Yeah, that's the continued last.
Yeah, that's from last night's public hearing, that's a somewhat related topics,
Right, yeah.
but not these specific amendments.
But these are also on May 5th.
This will be May 5th, yeah, this,
This will be May 5th.
yeah, this will open.
No,
on
no,
May
I
5th.
understand, but they said there's another one prior to it, on the same night, and it's gonna be lengthy. So-
Right, so that's probably gonna cut down on the time for each
Right,
one,
right.
right, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Pugh, first of all, I have to tell you, I have great admiration for the planning department. I'm sorry, not everyone can hear me. But the planning department is really the most important department because it's helpful in guiding the town during what is accomplished. And at the same time, they set up guidelines for us in the zoning ordinances. So reading and listening to tonight's speakers, it seemed that most of what was being produced was related to housing, residential lots. In terms of first the 15% permission. Now, originally, there's a ratio that the footprint of the house to the size of the lot was controlling. Of course, there are different rules for pre-existing lots where they're substandard according to today's rules. Now, that 15% would allow for the increase. Now, the example that you gave of that 8,000 square foot lot in Metuxet, you indicated that they could add to it. Now, has the percentage of lot coverage changed or not?
Thank you. Thank you
No,
for that.
no, have more questions.
Okay, percentage, well, we don't, there is still lot coverage, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 25%, it remains the standard.
Right.
The 15% modification can allow for up to 29%.
Right. Okay, so the simple answer would be, it has remained the same because the town decreased it by 15%, knowing that when you get that bonus of 15%, you get back to our historical lot coverage numbers. So, just to be clear, I know it's kind of confusing, but the town didn't arbitrarily say we're gonna decrease what people can build by 15%. It's in reaction to the state's 15% bonus. Bring it down, people apply for that, that should be basically pretty much automatic, almost, back to the baseline.
I just might suggest that I don't think too many elderly people would put a second floor around. Can you describe what's going on with regard to the parking for multifamily houses? Are they required to put in some type of a platform so that oil from the cars doesn't seep into the environment and into people's wells?
There are standards for multifamily housing, just there are standards for single-family housing. The construction standard that you're speaking of is, would only be applicable in the areas that are in the high water table overlay zone. That is one of our overlays. In the non-high water table overlay zone, there wouldn't be any standard at all.
Thank you, appreciate it. You have more?
I'm still gonna be.
Let's do one more.
Yeah, one more. We have others.
I'm sure there's others. One of the things that's important in construction of housing is that there be adequate water for residential use and also for hydrants for insurance purposes. And I'm sure that that is something that has been given consideration in these proposed amendments. And also, I'm thinking of the effluent that might come from the septic systems, and I understand our sewer capacity has been reached. So just a couple of questions that I had, and I'm sure that they come from the master of the comprehensive plan.
All right, thank you.
Do any of these proposals address people who own lots that were forced to merge a long time ago and are entertaining the thought of trying to subdivide at this point?
I'm gonna bring that over to Mike.
I understand the question is, does anything that's being proposed affect formerly merged lots, is that correct?
Yes.
The proposals, the 14 proposals that we're reviewing, none of them address that issue. The state law has changed though, and there's a formula. Seems like I'm always stuck with math questions here. There's a formula by which existing recorded lots could be separated from, one lot could be separated from another that's in co-ownership if the surrounding neighborhood is if the lot in question is the average size of the surrounding neighborhood. I don't want to get into the deep math part of it, but that's a different regulation, and the town regulations have been amended to comply with that.
All right.
Michael, you're talking about the 200-foot radius?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. At the risk of sounding like somebody that doesn't know what's happening, I'm new here. I'm very interested because I'm getting ready to build. But I'm trying to understand how much power does the town council have? Can we have all these meetings, and many people don't want it, some people will want it. After all the meetings, can the town council just do what they want? Is there any way the town council wants to move forward, that they would just stop except for going to court?
No, the town council can do what they want. They've gone through the process legally, which is to send this they referred it to planning, which you have to do. It came back, and ultimately it'll be up to them. So they'll listen to what people have to say, but it's going to be their decision. And the people could try to take legal action if this does pass. That's a separate thing. But the town council, they're the last call on this. Okay, yeah. For anyone taking photos or anyone took any photos, we will post this to the presentation to social media too.
Thank you, Jesse. This is more of a statement from I did see, I'm the unfortunate person, or fortunate, because this maybe brought emphasis to the bulk zoning, was the two houses, the last slide that was put up, I live right across the street from those houses. I live in East Willow. I'm not afraid to say it's a beautiful neighborhood, as all of them in Narragansett are. But what we're seeing tonight is all of these amendments have been already vetted out before over the period of 25 and 30 and 40 years. And we finally have something that's starting to take hold. So it defies me why anybody would want to just go in and change all of these, no matter what council or who it is, or why they would do this. You know, as the people were saying before, you know, on the board, they did a lot of good work.
You're right here.
I'm not gonna, I don't want this meeting to get out of hand, I just want to finish my statement, please. If they want to speak, they're fine. I'm gonna finish what I had to say. In East Willow, it started slow. We had a 4-bedroom colonial, turns into a 7-bedroom. There was really virtually no rules and regulations if you could put a 7,500 square foot house on a 10,000 square foot lot. So these improvements were made to help the town. We're finally there. Across the street from me now, I have 3 students in that house, and it's the best it's been since in 24 years that I've been living in that particular house. So that's a success story for me and the rest of the residents and the quality of life in this town. And you know, but it took a lot of time, it took a lot of work, things still need to be tweaked. But there's another side to this issue, and every time the town has been doing this precipitated a lawsuit in town, these 2 houses, because they had, they had started the project, and I guess the town was trying to pull back on it or whatever it was. And believe it or not, the town paid money to these owners to settle that lawsuit. I don't know what it wasn't a lot, but this is what happens in this unique town. That's why this zoning is so important for these people to get on board, understand what's happening to their town, and we don't lose it to all short-term rentals. We lead families, people that grow their families here. That's what we need. This zoning does nothing to do that. It doesn't even help the affordable housing thing. So I think the best recommendation would be for the town council not even to go forward with these ordinances. Just pull them.
Thanks, Steve.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick question. You said the reason for all these changes was to comply with state law. So I'm looking at this one that says businesses by right can serve alcohol at all residential zones. So if that complies with state law, is that true all over Rhode Island? That's my question.
That one, no, that's not related to complying with state law.
Thank you. I'm an attorney in town. I've raised a family in town. I've lived here since 2002. And I think it's important for all of us to take a deep breath a little bit and step back from a lot of the hyperbole that's been going on. I have listened to all the planning board meetings. My name's Patrick Doherty. I live in the north end of town. I live next to a duplex. And they did a beautiful job with it. They were respectful of their neighbors. I think if you really wanted to have a good idea of what has been going on, there should have been another table on the other side. They could explain the rationale as well. And I'm not here to hijack your meeting, but the hyperbole about the liquor licenses by right, that's not true. Liquor licenses have to be given out and regulated by the town council sitting as the liquor licensing authority. It has no place in zoning whatsoever. There's nothing in the enabling law that allows alcohol to be listed as a use. So it's not going to be like you're going to be handing out liquor licenses everywhere. The other thing, the state said that DEM and CRMC have plenary control over wetlands and those related overlay issues. That's why that came in. In addition to that, some of these other things, I don't think the people in this room fully realize that when the prior town council enacted the 15% reduction or increase in all the dimensions across the board, every person that had a house built out to the specifications and the setbacks and the standards in Metuxet, Harbor Island, Riverdale, Indian Trail, Forest Lakes, Pettaquamscot, Metuxet, The overwhelming majority, I'd say 90% of those houses are now dimensionally non-conforming. If you want to go and get any kind of relief, now you are non-conforming in your standard dimensions in your lots, and you're caught in this regulatory nightmare. This was a knee-jerk overreaction to the state granting a 15% discretion to the zoning and building official, not an automatic give. If any of the neighbors around the property that's seeking the 15% dimension object, it has to go before the board. So, again, one of the things that I just like people to do is to take a step back and stop the hyperbole. I mean, I've heard allegations that the town council has attempted to criminalize. No, that's on tape. That's on tape. It's outrageous.
We weren't going to go up here.
So all I would like to say is I think it's great. I think it's wonderful that you all are coming out here. But everything here that you presented is hyperbole. And there should have been another tape.
Thank you. So, not everyone has to agree on these issues here. That's why it's an information session. And we're, I believe, being extremely factual in what we presented. Mike, do you have any responses?
I may have shortchanged the explanation with regard to alcohol. As you know, because you're very familiar with the town zoning ordinance, that we have a line item in the zoning ordinance that says restaurants with alcohol, restaurants without alcohol. What one of the proposals is intending to do is to allow restaurants with alcohol to be allowed in residential zones. Now that's the zoning side of it. It has nothing to do with getting a license. It's the zoning side. And it also, one of the proposals also is indicating that if you have a non-conforming restaurant existing in a residential zone, then you can get a beer and wine license. That's what the zoning aspect of it said. I did not mean to say that it had to do with licensing. So that's just a good.
All right, thank you, Mike.
And they cut all the trees down.
First of all, I'd like to thank you folks who spoke this evening, because you were highly knowledgeable, and that's appreciated. I'd like to, just for a little perspective here, the gentleman that stood up and spoke so eloquently also is the attorney that represents a developer who's squeezing 21 units in my neighborhood in an area zoned for 3 houses. So just for a little perspective. But I'd like to reiterate this woman's question, because I think it's really a relevant one. If the town council is, putting this out there as obviously something that's recommended, what is the reason? What is the problem that they're trying to address? And I understand there are some town council people in this room, and I would think that this would be a wonderful opportunity to tell us.
So, thank you for the question and the statement. I think it's more productive tonight to focus on the regulations and the amendments and not possible ulterior motives. We don't know any of that. Nobody is aware of anyone's thoughts or why they're doing anything. What we're here tonight to do is talk about the details of what's proposed and whether it's good for the town or not, and if you agree with it or not. So if we can stick to that, I think it'll be more productive for everyone. Also, if anyone from the town council does want to speak, let me know, and we'll obviously be giving that option.
Thank you. Could you bring up, please, the graphic that showed the 2 big houses with the little one? So, looking at this, I hope you can all sit here and imagine that and someone correct me if I'm wrong, because I believe that these zoning amendments would allow this. If you put another big house like the big one on the far side of that home, and then put another big house across the street, so you got the 4 big houses around the little house, and then imagine that they're all duplexes, and each of them have 10 students or unrelated in them. You've got 10, 10, 10, and 10. And I believe that is correct with what has been proposed. Thank you.
Now, is these based on 8,000 square feet?
We showed about 8 and 10.
Where I live at 5,000. 5,000 square feet lots. Forget Scarborough. Forget Scarborough. All the lots 5,000 square feet. My issue when I brought up the planning board is sewerage and parking. I live across the street from the Street 5,000 square feet. You put something like that over there, we have problems with the sewage now. I can't imagine what it's gonna cost, and that's gonna have to be passed on to taxpayers. I think at the planning board, they did the numbers for sewage treatment plant. Right? I don't remember the exact, I know it was a real much.
Oh, to rebuild.
To rebuild that, of course, they have to.
Thank you. So again, if a 5,000 square foot lot, floor area ratio wouldn't exist if these amendments were pushed through, so it would be all about lot coverage plus the 15%. Anyone?
There's a question in the back.
Thank you. I came to this with the article in the South Carolina Independent newspaper. And I just want to clarify. I look up the article right now. Are they implying that there's a possibility that there won't even be a planning board to look things over? Is that true?
There would be a planning board. Its duties would be decreased in terms of for site review, right? So, I mean, it would exist. I'm not sure what it would be doing. There would be things for the planning board to review, but say plan review would not be one of those. Thank you.
The question I have is, there's some illusions that I've also heard that there's some sloppiness in the drafting of this ordinance. Who actually drafted the ordinance, and why should we be comfortable with this good amount of sloppiness there?
Thank you. I mean, I think the town council could answer that in a future meeting. They could talk about who drafted it. We don't want to speculate on that.
My question gets to what you talked about in terms of the 3 options that the town council has for passage. So my understanding is that the planning board had 45 days only to review the 14 ordinances, but you outlined that the town council actually has some options whether to look at these individually or pass them outright. So that's part 1 of my question. And then part 2 is, I also read the article in the paper recently about how Narragansett's Affordable Housing Collaborative has talked about how the town has been remiss with our planning ordinances and so forth, and we're not really doing enough about affordable housing, and that's getting in the way, and that if we adopted these state rules, that we would be able to build affordable housing. And I heard everyone here talk about how these rules aren't going to really result in more affordable housing. And so, as former town councilors, how can we cure this disconnect between our affordable housing collaborative and what these rules really can do? So,
That's a great question. So, anyone on the panel can answer that. I'll start by saying, if the 15% bonus that's mandated by the state was tied to requirements in affordable housing, like if you wanted to build something larger, you were gonna make it a subsidized unit, that would make sense. That doesn't exist. So that has nothing to do with affordable housing. A bigger single-family home doesn't make it affordable. It makes it more expensive, especially when it gets sold. So for that 15% bonus, I don't see, and I don't think anyone here sees how that helps with affordable housing. There were some things with inclusionary zoning and a few other things. I don't know if Terry, if you want to talk about that. It's probably
Accessory dwelling.
right, which the town has implemented.
Those kind of laws.
Right. So there are parts of what was in that package that the town has implemented and is in compliance with that should lend itself to affordable housing. But again, we've been on the town council, we've been planning board members. That's an issue the town's been dealing with for decades. And it's always going to be difficult when there's so many reasons for people to build investment properties. Until we stop that, it's going to be hard to make affordable housing. I just have to go to some other people. So. Anyone else? Or maybe I don't.
So I have two questions. One was earlier on, there was a point made about runoff, that building these big places would affect the runoff. Doesn't the runoff requirements to be captured on your property still exist?
Yep.
So I want to just take that one off the table. You know, I like to be honest about it. So that one doesn't exist, but everything else, you know, I agree with. There's seems to be two things going on. One of which is the state made changes, and they have to incorporate those changes. And then the second thing is the town council, along with those extra changes, is doing some other things. Is that correct?
Close. Yeah. So the state did make changes and a lot of those were required. The town has already implemented. Those are done, right? Those have been implemented with the last town council.
Okay.
We're in compliance.
So these 14 are new.
New.
Okay.
Right. So one of them reverses what the town did with changing the dimensions 15% less.
Okay.
This is reversing it back to where it was.
Okay.
But then the end result is now 15% higher.
Okay.
So the general feeling is that the town is best suited to determine their own dimensional regulations. We've had planning boards, we've had the planning department. We believe that towns should have the autonomy to decide how high a house should be, lot coverage, those sort of things. Why should the state override the town's existing regulations unless there is a true, I mean, even if it was for affordable housing, it's still a town prerogative if they want to do that. As soon as the state says we're going to override the regulations, then I think it's a philosophical question at that point.
This is about affordable housing.
I just have a question about what happened to 151 Ocean Road. There was, I lived there. There were 60 people that were year-round residents. They worked at South County Hospital. They were teachers, they were nurses, they were kids that went to the schools. It was sold to Procter Chanty. They, the lot, there are hardly any people there. It's all a write-off, and we lost affordable housing for 67 people in 37 units.
Does anyone want to speak on that? It's a long story.
Yeah, they weren't affordable, what we call capital A affordable under the state law. They were small A affordable, they were market-based that people could afford, absolutely.
I only paid $900
No, I know.
for a two-bedroom.
And when the new owners bought the property, they exercised the same action that another property owner exercised in Pier Village when they got rid of the apartments and built the condos. People were asked to leave after their
Everyone was
leases were.
evicted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to, well, I have a couple questions, but one, just out myself, let everybody know who I am as far as a resident. You know, I'm actually an ex-college student, so I did rent here back in the day. I would pay it to the next Since then, I had left Narragansett and always wanted to come back because I was a college student. I fell in love with the town. I ultimately came back, moved into Petticoat Terrace, and I've stayed there for several years. Then I moved over a little further down south of that house, then moved again, always knowing I was going to stay in Narragansett. My first neighborhood, a lot of renters, a little crazy. Second neighborhood, no renters, loved it. Third neighborhood's a little bit of a mix, you know, so you come into the neighborhood, half the houses have cars parked all over the front yard, and cars parked in the roads, and then occasional, craziness happens. I guess getting to my point, now that you know who I am, what my experience is in Narragansett, my question is, this is for you, Jesse, from the council, any of the folks over there, what is the benefit of all this for your average resident like me? And then second, if the answer is what I think it is, who does it benefit?
Thank you. I have been speaking a lot, so I'm going to give the microphone to Deb. I can answer that. It's pretty straightforward. So I don't think it has many benefits for residents. It would benefit certain individuals who currently cannot expand their house beyond what our area ratio allows. So there is that, that's true. No regulation is going to be perfect and never affect anyone negatively. There are cases, there's 33 that had to go through planning, so they needed a variance. So it would benefit that small segment of the population. So if you want to expand beyond what you're allowed. I think that's probably it. I think it's more of a negative effect in the long run. But again, those are personal opinions. I would not want to have 6,000-7,000 square foot homes sandwiched around me in my neighborhood. Because people don't move to Narragansett for that. That's not why you live here.
And who's the big winner?
I'll say it. The investors are the big winners.
There's a theme here, I think, which is frustrated me from the start. You don't blow all this up, decades of work. You don't blow it all up in one fell swoop. And if there's a particular aspect of the zoning ordinance or the FAR, or if the dimensions are too restrictive, or you think someone should have more, then you convene the workshops, you get public input, you get the technical expertise, and you make some decisions about specific elements of the zoning code. You don't blow up FAR and dimensional, which is exactly what I think is being proposed. And I just want to say one last thing before. Appreciate everybody coming out. I chaired 4 meetings on unrelated and student ordinances, and we didn't have a crowd like this. This is the biggest crowd that I've ever seen. And you ought to, whether you oppose this or support what they're doing, you should show up at the council meetings, because they need to hear from everybody. I've been in this town over 50 years, and a lot of you I've never met, I've never seen. But the same people go to the council meetings every 2 weeks. They need to see other people. They need to see a lot of you that maybe have not gone. So try to take the time, whether you support it or oppose it. Try to show up and give the council your opinion. Thanks.
Any other questions or statements? Anything you want to say?
Hi, I'm just a visitor here. I don't live in Narragansett. I'm here as my friend is a resident. But I only came I retired 4 years ago from Arizona I was always in charge of the utility company. I was on the other end of people, you guys yelling at me, and doing big transmission projects and building new well stations and solar farms. So I just had a few tips for you all, since you're passionate, this is your home. Again, I don't know your town, but I would just suggest that you might consider organizing, just because I'm used to having classes. I would suggest if you have some informal community leaders in the room that could take this upon, maybe you do a Facebook group or something, so when you do attend that meeting, you're going in it as a consolidated effort. This would just be, I don't think you would be taken that seriously if everyone's just doing all these different comments all around. I would say be more organized. You'd have a more organized effort amongst you, whether you're doing a survey, get some information together before you go there and have a few speakers of your community leaders on every community head. And I do say, it's because you have to run these public things and don't run Arizona Corporation Commission. You just want to be organized and have some facts. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Hello, everybody. I also want to reiterate that we attend the town council meetings, email our town council, and also, get to know our town council, because vilifying them without knowing their motivations doesn't work as well. I'm hoping, and I feel like that they do care about the residents. That's why they're here, right, Deborah? That's why you serve. They care, and that's why some of them are here. They want to know what we think. So let's not vilify them. Let's give them a chance to show that they really represent us. They represent how we feel. That's why we elected them. So let's give them that chance. They're listening right now. Hopefully, I have faith in them. I mean, I just do. So hi, Catherine. We all have our own interests, right, that we're trying to represent. I'm just here as a resident, and I care about the quality of life in this town, and I don't think we can accomplish anything by vilifying the other side. I just have faith. I want to have faith, and let's see how they do. Let's give them a chance. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, anyone else?
How did all those big houses get built?
Right now,
Well, before, we've got giant ones in Bonnet.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
you've got
Oh,
little
yeah.
ones. But where was the zoning or planning at that time? Oh, sorry.
Go to Mike, go to Mike.
The short answer is that without the floor area ratio regulation, a person.
Oh, there
could
wasn't
build-
one way back then?
No.
Oh, okay, never mind, that's the answer.
That was,
That was easy.
That's pretty well, didn't it?
That was easy.
okay, anybody else?
So this is just a comment. So here we have new town council, and they come out with a big set of changes. It reminds me of the library. I wasn't necessarily thrilled to have the new library, but I was certainly not willing to go and sell the library. How do we keep things in a relatively status quo basis? You make changes, but not huge changes.
Thank you. I think that probably comes back to one of the options that we had, which is to put on the brakes and say, this is probably too much to do all at once. And then because there are probably there may be some amendments that people agree on, but they've been bunched together. So instead of looking at them individually, people are upset about the more drastic changes. So again, this could be stopped, this could be voted down, and then the process could be restarted one by one. Which is send a specific amendment to the planning board, have that discussion, and they bring that back and you vote on that change.
Yep.
Okay, anyone else? Are we good?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.